This is part 2 of property taxes in the age of increasing property values. In part 1, I introduced the problem we're having right now: higher property values, higher taxes. I talked about the components associated with it. We have the cycle of the appraisals. We have then the taxing entities, our 4 taxing entities, then deciding what their tax rate will be based on those appraisals. I also talked about what the state has done in the past to at least alleviate the problem of higher assessed values, and that's by putting the homestead 10% cap on assessed value. And here it is in action. This is just our slide from Collins Central Appraisal District that I found out of nowhere because it's more typical of what the average house is going for. In 2017, they assessed the improvements and the land, and they came up with the total market value. And that's what they think, if this house were put on the market this year, that it would get that much money. Generally, that's the same up the appraised number. The HS cap loss is that 10% cap, and here's the assessed value. That's what we're taxed on, is this number right here. And as you can see, it was appraised and the market value was $350, but the assessment is only $336,000, and that's because of the 10% loss. This number right here is a 10% increase, but Colin Cad wanted to actually increase it more. So this is the rate right here. You get that rate, the assessed value of your property. You divide 100 into it, and then from that, you know the amount that each taxing entity is multiplied by. And after you do a little bit of work on it, you get your total tax number. So that was on the assessment and appraisal side. What about on the taxing entity side? So the state enacted truth in taxation requirements that all larger taxing entities must follow. They must set a budget, hold public hearings, inform the public of increases, and set the tax rate. This is the part that I think a lot of people have a problem with. If they see that the tax rate is exactly the same, why do they have to notify people of increases? Well, that's because our appraisals keep going up, so the taxes are increasing. The tax rate isn't, but the taxes they're collecting are increasing. If these rules are not followed, taxpayers may file injunctions, and that means that the taxing entity cannot collect taxes until the situation is resolved. And that's done to afford taxpayers the opportunity to roll back or limit tax increase. The way that taxing entities are required to inform citizens about increases in taxes would be with the effective and the rollback rates. Those are the 2 numbers that we get, especially from the city. Evidently, the ISD is only required to give the rollback rate. I will have those numbers soon for the MISD. When we see these 2 numbers, the effective rate and the rollback rate, we can better judge how much our taxing entities are really collecting from us, and then if they should continue doing that. If taxing entities exceed the rollback rate, they will have to hold an election so citizens can approve or reject the increase. And in order to calculate the rollback rate, you have to know the effective rate, and that's why you need to know it as well. Here are what I like to think of as our goalposts. On one end, on one side, we have our effective tax rate, and on the other, we have the rollback tax rate. We should have our number at least somewhere in the middle, or if not lower. But what's been going on is our taxing entities have just been keeping the number, the tax rate, like right here. So over here we have the effective tax rate. That's the lowest rate to get the same revenue from the same properties as the year before. Over here on the rollback tax rate, that's the highest tax rate possible without an election, and that's the effective rate plus 8%. Tax rates are supposed to be flexible, especially in times of high or low property assessments. And that is because the variable that we have working there is our property values. If the appraised values go up, the effective tax rate goes down. That means that you need a lower tax rate to get the same amount of money on the same properties as the year before. If the appraisal values go down, your effective rate is higher because you need a higher tax rate to collect the same value. And if everything stays the same, so does the effective tax rate. This is the seesaw effect that our taxing entities have not been doing. They've been having the slow and steady, consistent tax rate. And we're not in a time where our appraisals are the same. So we shouldn't be having that with our tax rate either. Here are the effective and rollback rates from McKinney last year. Here are the two property tax rates. You can see a little bit lower, tiny amount. But if you look, that's the rollback rate for this year. Do you see how close they are? This is the effective rate. We should have been closer to that. And instead, we were almost as close as possible to the rollback rate. Why does the effective tax rate matter? Appraisal values would not matter as much if taxing entities use the effective tax rate. Our cities and ISDs are mostly responsible for our dread of our yearly appraisal notices. And that's just a fact. If our taxing entities were lowering the tax rate, the higher our assessed values go, it wouldn't burn as bad as it does now. So why does the rollback tax rate matter? If your taxing entity continues to use a tax rate close to this rate, appraisal values matter so much more than they should. And this is a situation we're in now. Our taxing entities are just maintaining right here, just really close to having to have a rollback election. And that means they're getting all that extra value from our appraisals is going into us paying more to all four of these taxing entities. What property tax revenue does the effective tax rate include? It only includes the same properties taxed in previous and current years. And if you think to yourself, how is a city going to have the effective tax rate and pay for new people coming into the city? That's because the effective tax rate does not include new residential and commercial growth. Once the effective tax rate is calculated, that new residential and commercial growth is collected on top of what is collected on existing properties. So this is extra money that the city's getting. Cities are not being penalized for properties under protest or properties that were lost. And they're also not having to include the money that goes into the TERS 1 and 2. A TIF and a TERS are the same thing, and taxing units exclude the taxes paid into a TIF and a TERS. This is the portion of the captured appraised value that is above and beyond what the general fund gets. So for the TERS 1, that's the downtown TERS, any money that goes into it is not included in the effective rate. And the TERS 2, that's the airport TERS. None of the money that goes into that gets added into our effective tax rate. So this is all money that is on top of what they're getting right here. So as a review, when people talk about lowering the rate to the effective tax rate, they're saying that a city can collect the same property taxes on the same properties as last year, plus they can add in new growth, plus add in what is in the TERS 1 and 2. And if you want to pause this and look down here, I have broken down how much of TERS money goes into the general fund and how much goes into the TERS shelter for both TERS 1 and 2. So just as a review, look at the average property value increase year to year from 270,000 in 2016 to almost 300,000 in 2017. The tax rates are very similar, and it shows in the average tax levy increasing. Now this is just from the city of McKinney, and you can say that, oh, $152 increase every year is not that big of a deal. What you're forgetting is that the 152 is only about 24% of our total property tax bill. And you're not talking about the increases for MISD or Collin College or for Collin County. Everything increases when the property tax rate stays the same and the values increase.